Hey there, my name is Eric and you're listening to Delve, a podcast by the Deviance Faculty of Management of McGill University. So today I wanted to talk to you about organizational misconduct, or rather when organizations do harm to their communities. Every institution in any sector is capable of this kind of behavior. So a police officer might use excessive force on a civilian, or a company might dump toxic waste into a river, or a charity might cook the books to seem more effective than they are. And when these things happen, it hurts communities and it erodes trust in our institutions. So something I really want to explore today is how misconduct works. We have some amazing faculty here at Deviance who study misconduct, and some of their recent work shows us how social dynamics play a role here. So this refers to how a network of individuals organizes and influences each other's behaviors. And understanding these dynamics is fundamental to understanding and stopping organizational misconduct. So there's a lot to unpack here, obviously, so we're going to need some help. So today we're going to turn to some previous Delve interviews with Professors Amandine, Ody-Brasier, Diana Dakhlallah, and Sarah Gordon, all of whom are experts on organizational behavior, and they researched misconduct, how it works, and how to address it. Let's delve into it. Now, to start, we should remember that what's considered good and bad behavior can vary quite a bit depending on who you talk to. Every actor exists within a web of social connections, and this network of peers will have unwritten rules about how its members should behave. So if you've worked a few different jobs, you'll see what I mean. At your last job, maybe your team meetings were free-flowing and conversational, but maybe now they're more formal in your new role, following a very strict hierarchy and format. Now, these rules and norms are often unspoken, and sometimes they're not, but they do influence what's considered good and bad behavior. And this is where misconduct can become normalized within an institution. So Amandine Ody-Brasier is a professor of organizational behavior here at McGill, and she gave us an interesting case study in acceptable versus unacceptable behavior. So she looked at illegal music sampling in the EDM community, that's electronic dance music, and why some DJs are ostracized for it while others aren't. Her findings show us the social dynamics of misconduct, how they influence what's considered good and bad behavior, and how these dynamics can be stronger influencers on behavior than the law itself. So here's Professor Ody-Brasier explaining how deviant behavior can vary from group to group.
Everyone understands what it means to say illegal. We know what that means. Deviance has the advantage of signaling based on the literature from sociology, and there's a huge body of work on that. It is all about labeling. And what I mean by this is that what you consider deviant in one community may not be viewed as deviant in another community. It is in the eye of the beholder. And that matters a lot because not only across communities, you're going to have different definitions of what is acceptable, right? Think about some of the most basic practices, right? Social norms about smoking. Lots of variance. But even within a community, depending on what is driving a particular behavior, it will be labeled as deviant or not, which is what we find with, let's say, the aspiring DJ engaging in illegal remixing for artistic freedom versus maybe the more established DJ who is doing it perhaps as a shock value. It's a labeling story. We're talking about the exact same behaviors, but they're going to be labeled differently. And deviance is the term that allows us to signal this.
So Professor Ody-Brasier looked at deviance in remixing. So this is when an artist incorporates someone else's music into a recording of their own. Now you can do this legally by asking the copyright owner if you can use their music in your track. And if they say yes, then great, you're good to go. But if you don't get permission and sample the music anyway, you're likely breaking copyright law. Now, sampling music in this case is a type of misconduct in the eyes of the law, and in most cases, the EDM community would agree. They'll also condemn artists who feature copyrighted material without permission. But if you're just starting out as a DJ, the rules and norms are a bit different for you. The community will give you a little bit more leeway when using illegal tracks because, one, you probably don't have the clout to get the right permissions, and two, you may not even know how to clear a track in the first place, or have the resources to do so. So this points to the role of the community in determining what's acceptable behavior and what's not. Using copyrighted material is illegal no matter what, but newbies can do it anyway because they won't lose the support of their peers. So here's Professor Ody-Brasier again.
Norms are, as I defined earlier, they're really a shared understanding of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior within a community. When we talk about norm enforcement, norms can only exist if they're enforced. And enforced meaning the community is willing to incur some costs, whether they're financial or whether they are emotional, to punish individuals who violate.
So in the case of EDM DJs, community norms perform a self-policing function. Everyone is on the lookout for other DJs who are stealing from others and will punish or ostracize them if they do. But they'll turn a blind eye in other circumstances, such as when you're just starting your career and don't have the capacity to legally sample music on your own. Now, in the world of EDM, this kind of misbehavior seems innocuous enough. It's unlikely someone will die because a DJ sampled a song illegally. But what about other contexts, where consequences are, in fact, life or death? So Sarah Gordon is an assistant professor of organizational behavior here at McGill University, and she studied the social dynamics of misconduct at the Chicago Police Department, one of the biggest police departments in the United States. Now, when we hear about police misconduct, we often jump to one of two narratives. Either the entire force is corrupt, or it's just one bad apple who doesn't represent the whole department. But based on Professor Gordon's findings, the truth seems to lie somewhere in the middle. When misconduct occurs, it's usually among clusters of individuals, pockets of police officers who are aware of each other's problematic behaviors and enable them. Here's Professor Gordon.
So I look at groups of police officers engaging in severe forms of misconduct, and I find about 6,000 of these groups from 1991 to 2015. And so then I map them over time to see, like, all right, what is it about the structural properties of these groups? Can I find anything in common in terms of the ones who last the longest? And they last anywhere from 1 to, I think the longest is maybe 10 years. I find that there's essentially a sweet spot of structure for these groups. So I look at the social cohesion of the group. So how closely tied are they all to each other, right? And then I also look at what we call structural inequality of the group. So essentially, like, what is the distribution of that social cohesion? So is everybody kind of tied together in one big clump, or are some folks more embedded with the group than others? Social cohesion and structural inequality are helpful for these groups up to a certain point. So as those characteristics increase, so does their survival, their longevity, up to a certain point. And then the effect boomerangs back down. And then after a midpoint, social cohesion and structural inequality become a liability to these groups.
Each group of police officers who engaged in misconduct has its own set of social dynamics. And the nature of these dynamics contribute to their longevity in the police department. So then what do you do when pockets of misconduct have sprouted all over your organization? In the case of the Chicago PD, Professor Gordon found that identifying and punishing bad behavior was actually not always an effective tool for stopping it. So it sounds like we're going to need more tools. Diana Dakhlallah is an assistant professor of organizational behavior here at McGill, and she studied the prevalence of bribery in Moroccan maternity wards to identify tools for rooting out this kind of behavior. And she came out with something of a framework for treating misconduct.
So a lot of my work on bribery is precisely focused on looking at how it happens inside organizations. And I think that's where the story needs to be in large measure. One of the things that I wanted to do was to say, okay, well, to really understand this systematically, we need to go drill down to the level of where these interactions happen. So what happens is you drill down to organizations and then within organizations as well. And now it opens up a very different world of possibility for understanding the problem and also for trying to find solutions to the problem. I think, one of the key things is that it really roots the issue in organizational design, which I think is key. I think particularly when we think about public sector organizations or the public sector more generally, often when people think about corruption or bribery and solutions to it, they're often thinking about very blunt policy instruments. So they're like, okay, maybe we need to deal with, enforcement, or maybe we need to, adopt certain laws, or we need to. And so in a way, these blunt instruments don't really pay attention to the variation that's happening or even to root cause. And I think that usually when we think of the organization of work in an organization or in a work unit, people have more control over that. Across work units, what varies is the way work is organized. What varies is the kind of relationships that workers have with each other. It's going to be the same thing if you're looking across organizations as well. And so now the question is, what is it about, the units where you have this higher incidence? Let's suppose we just focus on one organization. We find that, bribery is salient in a few of the work units there. In the case of, say, a hospital, there's one or two wards where the rates seem to be highest, and then the rest, there really isn't much going on. So now you ask the question, well, what is it about these places? Why is it that in these wards we're seeing significantly higher rates than, say, other wards?
So the first step is to identify where the unwanted behavior is happening, at a very granular level. Then you have to investigate why these individuals are engaging in this behavior in the first place, and only then can you come up with custom solutions to deter that behavior. So in Diana's case, she found that bribery can vary not only from hospital to hospital, but also from ward to ward, and that maternity wards in particular had higher instances of bribery than others. The challenge now is understanding why. So she found that a big factor was the porous nature of their jobs. Maternity care workers shared many of the same responsibilities as doctors, but didn't actually receive the same pay. She also found that, even though they participated in bribery, the offending maternity care workers all agreed that bribery is wrong and never actually sat right with them. So we know where the behavior is occurring, maternity wards, and we know a few of the variables that could explain why it's happening: porous job boundaries and compensation issues. And we know that no one particularly likes taking bribes, but they do it anyway. Now, you could pick any of these variables as your base when designing an intervention. For example, you could increase pay or redesign people's jobs so the work is distributed more fairly. But Professor Dakhlallah focused on the workers' distaste for bribery overall. She sensed fear and shame around the behavior and tested an intervention that kind of played into those factors. So here's Professor Dakhlallah again.
So I was able to document how patients received care. And maternity, pretty much as I said, emerged as the core, like the hub, in a sense. In each hospital, it was a hub for bribery. And I thought, okay, well, let me focus testing my intervention, which is focused on social accountability among coworker groups in maternity wards. And so what I did was I generated a one-page report for maternity wards in which I shared information about the percent of patients who reported paying bribes in their service. At the end of that report, I also notified them that I'd be conducting a second wave of data collection. And for that second wave of data collection, I was also going to be surveying patients, only next time I'll be breaking it down by type of provider. So in this case, it would be doctors, nurses, midwives, and it would also be circulated hospital-wide. So that was what you can think of as a visibility threat intervention in a sense, where you've shared information about the occurrence of the phenomenon. Okay, so now they have a sense also of the prevalence of this phenomenon in their wards. But the key thing is basically saying that there's going to be further breakdown of that.
Okay, so Professor Dakhlallah's intervention threatened to expose workers' behaviors to their colleagues. She informed maternity care workers that bribery was occurring in their wards, then advised them that a more detailed breakdown of this misconduct was on the way. So the idea here is that under this threat of exposure, that these wards would reduce their unethical behavior. So did it work? Well, overall, yeah, it seems like it did. But there are some caveats. So here is Professor Dakhlallah again.
So one of the things that happened actually, and this was through the mapping exercise, was that, yes, maternity wards were a hub across hospitals, but they also varied in the amount of bribery that occurred, that happened in the wards. In the higher incidence wards, healthcare workers cut back on taking bribes substantially. In the lower incidence wards, they maintained their activity levels.
So wards with high instances of bribery came down, while those with already few instances were unchanged. So what does this mean exactly? Well, on one level, it implies that bribery is acceptable up to a certain threshold, beyond which the people who are performing this behavior start to feel uncomfortable with what they're doing. Otherwise, we would have seen a drop in bribery across all maternity care wards, including those with already low levels of bribery. And these results also highlight the importance of social dynamics in this context. People accepted bribes, yes, but they quickly stopped when they realized others might find out. So Professor Dakhlallah is leveraging social dynamics here to disincentivize this unwanted behavior. Plus, these results show us that social dynamics are just one piece of the misconduct puzzle. Threatening to expose their misconduct lowered the overall occurrences of bribery, but it didn't eradicate it completely. Other causes are at play here, which means an exposure threat could be more effective alongside other interventions that address other root causes to the behavior. So social dynamics are a powerful driver of misconduct. It's much easier to do something wrong when it feels accepted, normalized, or even rewarded, but this is not an insurmountable problem. As we saw in Moroccan maternity wards, by looking closely at the root causes of misconduct, we can start to create custom solutions to deter these behaviors. Some of those can leverage social dynamics, like through naming and shaming, while others can actually involve structural changes like reorganizing teams, increasing pay, or adjusting workloads. Now, of course, there's no silver bullet, and you're not going to eradicate misconduct in a day, but starting to understand social dynamics and the other factors that play into misconduct are a step in the right direction. And doing so can give you the insights that you need to understand this behavior in your organization and design custom solutions to address it. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. All of the clips in today's episodes were pulled from previous Delve interviews, so if you're interested, I strongly encourage you to go back and listen to them in their entirety. I'll link to them in the show notes. There's a lot to learn there. And if you like what you heard today, why not subscribe? We have plenty of great management insights coming down the pipe, and you're not going to want to miss it. We're also on LinkedIn and Instagram if you want to follow us there. Just search McGill Delve on those platforms. So Delve is the official thought leadership platform for the Desatel Faculty of Management at McGill University. This episode was narrated, edited, and mixed by me, Eric Deter. I also borrowed clips from previous Delve interviews by Robin Fadden and Saku Mantara. Saku Mantara also produced all the original music, and he's our editor-in-chief. You can email us at delve@mcgill.ca. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.